A couple of weeks ago, a longtime friend of mine, my friend Ron, who lives in London, told me about a book about prayer by the California author Anne Lamott. It's called Help, Thanks, Wow. Help, Thanks, Wow. Some of you may know her writings. She's written a lot of books on spirituality as well as being a prize-winning novelist. This book is a quick read. It's barely 100 pages long, but that title caught my eye. And I'd like to share some thoughts about those prayers today. Help, thanks, wow. Now, as Claudia said, we at Capital City Unity like to affirm that prayer is what we do best. And after all, our entire movement is based on our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week prayer service at Silent Unity. Prayer is our foundational activity. You know, it's always a value to review why this is so. Going back to basics is always a good thing. So let's do some basics. The Metaphysical Bible Dictionary's entry on prayer is one of the longest I've read in all the years I've accessed the dictionary. So I'm going to start with this. We're not going to read the whole thing, but here's what caught my eye in the dictionary. To one in understanding of truth, prayer is an affirmation of that which is in being. Capital B, being. Prayer is an affirmation of that which is in being. In other words, we always begin by affirming divine reality, that which is in being right now. We start by acknowledging that whatever is going on is God. God is all there is. Prayer, as my friend Rodney Jones likes to say, is taking refuge in reality. Anne Lamott puts it this way. She says, prayer is our sometimes real selves trying to communicate with the real, with truth, with the light. Now, the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary goes on to say, then why the necessity of the prayer or affirmation if the desired condition already is? Good question. In order that the creative laws of the word may be fulfilled, we must pray. Because all things in God are potentialities. It's our share in the creative process to bring the unmanifest into manifestation. This is a powerful insight. It focuses us on our creative activity, on the truth that we are always creating our reality with our thoughts. And prayer is a method, if not the method, by which we manifest divine reality and divine order in our lives. For when we pray, we are connecting with the infinite mind and the infinite field of potentials that is what we call divine substance. And by our conscious word, we are manifesting the world we desire. Anne Lamott calls prayer communication from our hearts to the great mystery. And there's truth in that observation, for as we know, God will always be a mystery to the intellectual mind. But she also says, prayer is talking to something or anything with which we seek union. Now, as true students, we don't seek union with God, for we know we are always one with the divine. We don't need to look for that which we already have. No, instead, what we seek is consciousness of this union. We practice the presence of God as a way to transcend our error consciousness that tells us we are separate and finite. Now coming into spiritual realization where we feel everything resonating with the presence of God. In a very real way, we are engaged in the work of healing, as Claudia led us in the meditation, healing the spiritual trauma that comes from our human belief in separation, in lack, in limitation, in poverty, in sickness. We don't do this healing by our human efforts, but by inviting the Christ consciousness that is always within us to do the work. And this leads us to Anne Lamott's first prayer, help! Now, how many of us began our spiritual journey by experiencing something so devastating, so overwhelming, so hopeless, that we felt we had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, no possibility of resolving the situation. For those of us wrestling with addictions like alcoholism or drug dependency, we call this hitting bottom. And if you're like me, you've hit bottom more than once. Life is a series of problems we must confront and deal with over and over and over again until the very last day. And every once in a while, we confront a problem so big, so frightening, so crushing that our only response is despair and terror. This is when help is the appropriate prayer. The cry for help when we are feeling hopeless and at our wits' end is an act of deep and simple faith. Lamott says we are summoning the courage of a child when in our anguish we call out for help. It's also the admission that of ourselves we do not have the power to solve all of our problems on our own. Help is a surrender prayer. It's a letting go, letting God activity. We are humbling ourselves before the steadfast love of God. It's our access to the golden key. Lamott's book is not based on new thought, yet she has an idea of the golden key, which, as we know, is take your focus off the condition and put it on God. Here's what she says about this. She says, praying help means that when we ask that something, we ask that something give us courage to stop in our tracks right where we are and turn our fixation away from the Gordian knot of our problems. We stop the toxic peering and instead turn our eyes to something else, to our feet on the sidewalk, to the middle distance, to the hills, whence our help comes, someplace else. Maybe this is the shift of only 8 degrees, but it can be a miracle. She says it may be one of those miracles where your heart sinks because you think it means you have lost. But in surrender, you have won. And if it were me, after a moment, I would say, thanks. Thanks, gratitude, appreciation, Lamott's second essential prayer. Gratitude is the great heart opener. When we spontaneously experience gratitude for the answer to a prayer, for deliverance from an oppression, for an unexpected joyful event, we are opening ourselves to the delight that God feels for us. I want to read a passage that illustrates her thought about this. She says, thanks is the short form of the original prayer I used to say in gratitude for any unexpected grace in my life. And that prayer was, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. As I grew spiritually, she writes, the prayer became the more formal thank you. And now from the wrinkly peaks of maturity, it's simply thanks. Now as then, most of the time for me, gratitude is a rush of relief that I dodged a bullet. The highway patrol guy didn't notice me speed by, or the dog didn't get hit by someone speeding by, or, oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, that it was all a dream. My child didn't drown. I didn't pick up a drink or appear on Oprah in underpants with my dreadlocks drooping in my head. These are all DEFCON 1 moments of relief and gratitude, worth giving God thanks. In New Thought, gratitude is inexorably linked with prosperity. Eric Butterworth, our great unity teacher from the last century, said, gratitude is a level of consciousness that opens the way to the divine flow and attracts new good things. He says, wherever you are, whatever your need, God is within you. The whole universe stands behind you to a degree equal to the full extent of your needs. All the power of heaven and earth are working on your side, on the side of healing, on the side of overcoming. In other words, thanksgiving is not just a reactionary emotion. Something happens and I give thanks for it, like Anne Lamott just said. No, giving thanks is a causative energy, an energy that listens to the highest level of consciousness, enabling us to experience the highest level of life. In the revealing word, Charles Fillmore writes, all metaphysicians have found by experience that being thankful for what they have increases the inflow. Gratitude, I like this, gratitude is a great mind magnet. And when it is expressed from the spiritual standpoint, it is powerfully augmented. Gratitude is gratitude is not so much of a thought as it is a feeling with a thought attached. When our hearts open through gratitude, we feel it first. We feel a burst of well-being and buoyancy in our chests, a tingling throughout our bodies. And only once we feel these does our mind label it gratitude. This feeling is a direct experience of the presence of God, the God through which all things are possible, by virtue of which all prayers are answered, by the loving power of which all things are brought into manifestation. That feeling of expansion in the chest, gratitude. Eric Butterworth tells a story about himself in his talk on gratitude. He says, I always had a belief that if I could get a view from on high and high enough up, see from a perspective of wholeness, then I would be able to deal effectively with life. All my life, I've loved the mountains. Much of the time of my greatest realizations, points of inspiration, show up in the mountains. In the early days of the Second World War, I went through a struggle of conscience. I hated war, but then I felt a responsibility to my country. The problem was I was a ministerial student eligible for a 4D classification, which would exempt me from the draft. I wasn't sure about that. So I took a trip to the Rocky Mountains, a favorite wilderness area of mine, where I packed high up into the wild. Each morning I would climb up the highest peak around and sit in quiet meditation, not expecting to hear God's voice, but I needed direction. I needed to know what to do to resolve the conflict within myself. Now you might notice right here that Mr. Butterworth is saying his own help prayer. Help! He's come up against a problem he can't solve, so he's just letting go and asking God. He says, in 2 days it became clear. I would just go about my day-to-day affairs and let life happen. I formulated an affirmation that I've used through the years, and it has been used throughout the Unity movement. And that is, God's law of adjustment regulates all the affairs of my life, and all things are in divine order. So to make a long story short, he concludes, I was drafted and assigned to the medical corps. I had a very fulfilling and meaningful experience during my years in the service. It was that view from the top, that mountaintop perspective that opened the way. This, I think, is what Thanksgiving is. At least it is to me. So, reflecting on Eric's mountaintop experience, can you not see how this now leads us to Anne Lamott's third essential prayer? Wow. Wow. When we let go and let God, when we feel spontaneous gratitude for each new way that God's love manifests in our lives, when our eyes are opened to the splendor and the grandeur and the majesty of divine order operating through us, what else can we say but wow? Anne Lamott goes on to say this. She says, the third great prayer, wow, is often offered with a gasp, a sharp intake of breath, when we can't think of another way to capture the sight of shocking beauty or destruction, of a sudden unbidden insight or an unexpected flash of grace. Wow means we are not dulled to wonder. We click into being fully present when we're stunned into that gasp by the sight of a birth, or images of the World Trade Center towers falling, or of the experience of being in a fjord at dawn for the first time. Wow is about having one's mind blown by the mesmerizing or the miraculous, the veins in a leaf, birdsong, volcanoes. She says, when we are stunned to the place beyond words, We're finally starting to get somewhere. I love that. When we are stunned beyond words, we are starting to get somewhere. When an aspect of life takes us away from being able to chip away at something until it's down to a manageable size and then to file it away nicely, when all we can say in response is, wow, that's a prayer. Wows come in all shapes and sizes, she says. So I ask you, what's your most recent wow? I've been having some wows lately because I've started to notice I'm actually able to see my thoughts change right in front of my eyes. Several times in the last week, something aggravating has happened, and I notice my old habitual critical or nagging response form in my head. But then immediately I notice another more powerful thought showing up. Immediately, critical thought, new thought. I don't want that critical thought, so let me step back and create a better one. Wow. As Lamott says, wows come in all shapes and sizes. So I invite us, let's take a moment now to remember our own most recent wow and allow that experience of total shift in consciousness to refresh your heart. Take a moment. What's your most recent wow? Now, you won't be surprised to learn that Eric Butterworth agrees with Anne Lamott about the power of wow. In a sermon that he shared on healing, he says this: everybody has a wow experience where we see how wonderfully we're made, how marvelous is this creative force within us, how ever present and completely eternal is the God activity within us. Let's determine that we will never again let ourselves fall unconscious to where we feel sorry for ourselves, wonder why God has allowed this to happen to us. God hasn't allowed it to happen. God doesn't have any part in the happening. God is the allness and the wholeness with which you can rise out of the unconscious of the happening and realize it can be the healing force of God. Remember, there is within you this marvelous healing system, which is being discovered and worked with in the medical profession as well as in the healing movement. A belief system, he writes, in your consciousness and the power to lay hold of this healing activity that it may do its perfect work in you. Paul said it, stir up the gift of God within you. This is your responsibility. The gift of God is always in you, never diminished, certainly never separated from you. You can't lose it because you're a creative activity of the universe, which is whole, and you're whole. Yours is the responsibility to stir it up, quicken it to activity, to the forefront of your consciousness, and believe and accept and rejoice and give thanks. So once again, just to articulate and to give focus on something that's working in us, give over to the excitement, he says, the excitement we feel about it. And let's just say together, wow, wow. Help, thanks, wow. Whenever a problem is presenting itself to us, and sooner than later a new one comes along, maybe even right after today's service, we can apply these three essential prayers to assist us to resurrect the Christ consciousness within. We are always enfolded in the loving arms of our Father, Mother God. We always have access to God's healing, prospering, compassionate energy. We always have the ability to focus on God alone and open ourselves to the wonder of our being, the wonder of God in us, right here, right now. So as always, let's close by putting our wow into music, by singing together, How Great Thou Art. And that can be found on the inside back cover of our Wings of Prayer. How Great Thou Art. Gordon?